Hey there folks, MIDI keyboards. What are they? What can they do? And how can you use them? Well, today we're going to look at just that, and I'm going to show you how I have my Arturia Keylab 61 set up for maximum control of the gear in my studio. Now there's loads of MIDI keyboards on the market, from small ones with 25 keys up to full-on hammer action 88 key models. Some of them just have keys, and some of them have knobs and faders and drum pads, and some of them have other advanced functions like arpeggiators and sequencers. For example, here I have an Arturia Keylab 61, over here a Keystep 37, here a Keystep Pro, and here a Sparkelly drum controller. And all of these are MIDI controllers. By the way, other manufacturers are available, it just so happens I have a lot of Arturia gear. But all of these have one thing in common. They don't make any sound on their own. They need to be connected to something, like a computer via USB for playing software or VST synths, or to a physical hardware synth via a MIDI cable, something like a desktop module that doesn't have any keys of its own, or even a full-blown hardware synth that you just want to be able to control remotely. MIDI keyboards can also be used to control your DAW, operating things like transport controls, the play, record, stop, etc. Or even things like the faders for volumes in your mixer. So how does all that work? Well, let's take my Keylab 61 as an example. Now this is an old Mark I model, but the later models have similar functionality, and MIDI keyboards from other manufacturers will have similar capabilities. It just depends on which one you've got as to how much it can do. As you can see, the Keylab has a large amount of controls available. It has 10 knobs, 9 faders, for which you actually have 2 banks, so really that's 20 knobs and 18 faders, 16 drum pads, transport buttons, and then a number of other buttons for programming and selecting functions on the Keylab, along with the standard pitch and mod wheels and buttons for changing octaves. Now all of these knobs, faders and drum pads can be programmed to transmit MIDI CC messages or note values, or more advanced things such as program changes. And all of these can be configured to different MIDI channels so that you can control multiple different pieces of hardware or VSTs. If you're new here and not sure exactly what things like MIDI CCs are, I'll leave a link to a video in the description down below that covers this in more detail. The trick the Keylab 61 has up its sleeve is it has 10 user memory slots known as snapshots, and each snapshot can be used to trigger a different synth on a different MIDI channel. And for each snapshot, the knobs and faders and drum pads etc. can be programmed to do different things. For example, here is my cheat sheet showing how everything is programmed for each of the snapshots. Snapshots 1 to 4, listed across the top, enable the Keylab to control 4 of my hardware synths, the MODX, Matrix Brute, DeepMind and Polybrute, which are all set to MIDI channels 1 to 4. Snapshots 5 to 9 then enable control of various manufacturers' VSTs in my DAW, with each set to specific MIDI channels. And snapshot 10 is spare at the moment. You can then see in the table that for each snapshot, the 10 knobs, P1 to P10, and the 9 faders are all programmed to do different things under each snapshot. This allows me to not only play the respective synths using the keys on my Keylab, but also to control various of their parameters like cutoff, resonance and the VCF and VCA envelopes. I do this as I tend to use my MODX here with the Keylab above it as my main composing tools, and this allows me to access all of my synths, whether hardware or VSTs on the computers, from one place without having to constantly spin around in my chair or go backwards and forwards to the computer. So how did I program all this on the Keylab? Well, the Keylab has a software editor called the MIDI Control Center, provided free by Arturia. It allows you to edit all of the functions on the MIDI keyboard depending on whichever model you're using. And Other manufacturers will have similar editors for their MIDI keyboards, and some of them are just programmed on the keyboard itself. And here is the MIDI control center with my Keylab 61 loaded up. And if I go over to the device menu, I can choose whatever device I want to edit, depending on which ones I own. For example, here connected, I have my Keylab 61, Keystep 37, Keystep Pro, Matrix Brute and Spark LE. And if I owned any other ones of these in the disconnected section, when I plug them in with the USB, they would appear here in the connected section and I'd be able to edit them. By default, the working memory and default factory templates are highlighted, and if I click on various knobs and faders, you see they are all programmed by default to do different things. For example, knob P1 is set to control CC74 for brightness, and knob P10 is set to control CC91 for reverb. These default settings are all set to control the macro controls in Arturia's Analog Lab software, which, as you can see, has corresponding knobs and faders. You can, in the Analog Lab software, change the layout to mirror your actual keyboard. So here I have the 10 knobs to the left and the 9 faders to the right, exactly like my actual Keylab 61. But if I go to Settings and then to MIDI, I can choose my Keylab controller. So if I had the latest Keylab Mark III, I could choose that, and you'll see the layout changes with the knobs along the top and the faders underneath them, exactly like the new Mark III model. Now this is where many people's journey ends, just using the default settings out of the box. But as we know, MIDI keyboards are capable of a whole lot more. So in the MIDI control center, under device memories, you can see there are 10 memory slots, and these relate to the 10 snapshot switches that you can see here on the front panel of the keyboard. In order to populate these, we need to create 10 corresponding user templates down here. Now I've already done this, but to do so, you would just click on New and then type a name for the template. So I've done this and I created 10 templates named Memory 1 through to Memory 10. Once I've set up those user templates, I then need to program which synth I want each of those memory slots to control. So starting by highlighting Memory 1, I go over and click the Snapshot 1 button, which is then highlighted red. Go down to where it says Snap 1, choose the mode, which here will be keyboard memory, and then set the channel. Here I've set it to channel 1, as it's going to control my MODX, and my MODX is on channel 1. Then I've clicked on Snapshot 2, set the keyboard mode to keyboard memory, and set that to channel 2, as that's going to control my Matrix Brute. And then I repeat that as per my chart from earlier. So Snapshot 3 would be channel 3, 4 would be channel 4, then Snapshot 5 would jump to channel 11, and then channels 12 to 14 with the last snapshot left as off. Once I've set up all the snapshot buttons here for Memory 1, I would then do the same for Memory 2 through to Memory 10. So for example, under Memory 2, I would again go to each snapshot button, and Snapshot 1 would be keyboard memory, channel 1 and memory number 1. Snapshot 2 would be the mode as keyboard memory, channel 2 and memory number 2. 3 would be channel 3 memory 3, etc, etc. You may be wondering at this point why I have channels 1 to 4 on the first 4 snapshots, and then I jump to channels 11 to 14 for the remaining snapshots. Well, this is because of how my studio is set up. Basically, I have 6 hardware synths set up on channels 1 to 6, a drum machine set up on channel 10, and then VSTs set up on channels 7 to 9 and 11 to 15. And if I open my DAW, Cubase in this instance, you can see I have a template that contains all the audio, MIDI and VST tracks for all my gear, all organised by MIDI channel. For more info on why and how I have everything set up this way, I'll leave a link in the description to my video on DAW templates that you may find useful. You'll also notice that I have two synths over here, my Behringer Pro 1 and Behringer Neutron, that are set to channels 5 and 6, but don't have them programmed on my Keylab 61. This is because they don't respond to or transmit CC messages, and therefore I can't control their parameters using the knobs and faders on the Keylab 61, and I didn't want to waste any of the snapshots. I wanted to get the most I could out of the functionality on the Keylab, controlling as many different synths as possible. Once I've set all of the snapshots for each of the user memories, as I did earlier, I then need to go into the Project tab for each user memory, and here set the corresponding MIDI channel. So memory 1 would be MIDI channel 1, memory 2, MIDI channel 2, memory 3, MIDI channel 3, as per my chart earlier. Now the Keylab does have a part 1 and a part 2 in case you want to split the keyboard. Generally, I leave this split mode off, and so therefore part 1 and part 2 just have the same MIDI channel. And just in case I forgot to mention earlier, every time you make a change to one of these user templates, before you move on to the next one, you have to save those changes just by clicking save down the bottom here. If you do try to move to another memory to make some changes and you haven't saved the one that you were working on, it will come up with a prompt telling you whether you want to save those changes or not. Once I've set all those snapshots up in the MIDI control center, I then need to send all that data to the physical Keylab in order for everything to work. To do that, I click on Memory 1 in User Templates and then go up to the top and click Memory 1 under Device Memories, and then click on Store To, and this sends all that info to the device memory on the keyboard. I then repeat that for memories 2 to 9. No need for 10 in my case, as that one's empty at the moment. What this now means is I can swap between synths at the touch of a button. To access them on the Keylab, I would press the Edit button, and then I would press the Recall button, and on my display it will say memory number 01, and then I just press the preset knob to select, and that takes me out of the default memory and into the user memories that I've just programmed. So snapshot 1 can play my MODX. Snapshot 2 plays my matrix brute. Snapshot 3 plays my deep mind. And snapshot 4 plays my poly brute. Snapshot 5, my Spectrasonics VST, Omnisphere in this case. Snapshot 6, my Steinberg VSTs. Snapshot 7, my Korg VSTs. Snapshot 8, Roland. And snapshot 9, my Arturia. Next, I can then program each of these memory slots or snapshots and edit each of the knobs and faders on the Keylab 61 to relate to the specific synth that that user slot will be controlling. Let's take snapshot 2 for example. We know from my cheat sheet this will be controlling the matrix brute on MIDI channel 2, and that the knobs and faders will be controlling the various listed functions along with their CC numbers. For example, the first knob, P1, is set to control the Steiner filter cutoff using MIDI CC 23. So in the MIDI control center, I would go to memory 2, as that is channel 2 for my matrix brute. Click on the first knob, P1 here, which would be highlighted red, and then go down to the bottom, and in the mode, I would choose control, which is for CCs. I would choose channel 2, as that's the channel the matrix brute is on, and then the CC number, which is 23. And then I would set the minimum and maximum values to 0 and 127. I'd then repeat this for all the other knobs and faders, programming them as per my chart earlier, setting the mode as control, the channel to 2, and the CC number to whatever I had in that chart for that function. And again, when I finished programming all of those, I would hit on save to save that memory slot. I'd then repeat this process for all the other user templates, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., setting each knob and fader to control, the relevant channel, and then the relevant CC number as per the cheat sheet. Once I've programmed all the relative knobs and faders for each memory slot, as we did earlier, we need to send all of those changes to the physical Keylab. And again, this is done by just choosing matching pairs, memory 1 and memory 1, and then clicking store 2, and then memory 2 and memory 2, and then store 2, etc. This now means that not only can I play my other hardware synths or VSTs using the keys on my Keylab, but I can also control various parameters on each of those synths using the knobs and faders, etc., directly on the Keylab to affect those other synths. For example, here's my Matrix Brute on Snapshot 2, and I can control the master cutoff. Here's my Deep Mind on Snapshot 3, and I've got one of the faders set to control the high pass filter. The cutoff in my Omnisphere VST. Or say the crusher effect on one of my Roland VSTs. Finally, as a bit of icing on the cake, I've then programmed the drum pads on the Keylab to control one of my favourite drum VSTs. To do this, I again go to the MIDI control center, and for each user template, I click on the pads, and then I set each one to MIDI note for the mode, and then to channel 9, which is the channel that the VST is set up on, and then I program the note values, which in this case are C1 through to D sharp 2. And then I've set the minimum and maximum velocities to 127, so effectively the pads operate at a fixed velocity. And as you can see, pad 1 is note C1, pad 2 is C sharp 1, pad 3 is D1, pad 4 D sharp 1, etc. And again, as before, I then need to send all those changes to the keyboard by clicking on the matching pairs of user memories and device memories and hitting store 2. Now if I go to say Snapshot 3, I have my Deep Mind 12 on the keys, but I have my drum VST on the pads. And if I go to Snapshot 4, I now have my Poly Brute on the keys, but I still have my drum VST on the pads. And that's it. That's how I've programmed my Keylab 61 to control various synths and their functions. Now I've used the Keylab 61 here as an example, but check out the manuals on your own MIDI keyboard or the software editor that came with it, as you may be surprised at what it's able to do. Having this level of control from one keyboard can be a great benefit in the studio, but is also highly beneficial for live performing, being able to control many things from one master keyboard. I'd also highly recommend, if you haven't seen them, watching my other videos on MIDI CCs and DAW templates, as they may give a bit more context to this sort of setup. And I'll also leave a link to my entire MIDI playlist, which covers a whole host of different topics. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, and if you have, please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell, as it really is appreciated. Also, if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments down below and I will get back to you. Indeed, any other comments or feedback is gratefully received. And don't forget to check out the playlists on my channel, as there's loads of other videos there that you might find useful. But for now, I've been Graham. Take care and catch you later.